And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God said to Noah, I will destroy them with all the earth. In the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they knew not until the flood came and took them all away.
The story of the Genesis flood and Noah's Ark has long been thought of as only mythology, just a part of religious folklore. And that idea has been reinforced by statements by some scientists that such a flood could not have happened. There's just not enough water in the atmosphere for a flood any deeper than a few inches. And yet the Bible describes the flood as covering the highest mountains. And then there's the matter of the ark itself. Such a small boat could not have carried all the thousands of species of animals existing now, they say. Because of statements like these, many people believe the whole account is a figment of someone's imagination or an exaggeration of an actual event in the past. This, in turn, causes a disbelief in the idea of judgment as well. For if God did not judge the world in Noah's day, people assume he'll not judge anyone in the future. I'd like to introduce you to someone who will take us on a fascinating journey through some information that will shed some light on this important subject. Jack Dabner is both a film producer and Bible teacher. For several years, he's been gathering information about this biblical account of Noah's Ark. Jack, how did you become involved in this unique project?
For some time now, many people have expressed serious doubts about the historic and scientific accuracy of the Scriptures. These doubts are based on apparent contradictions between statements of some scientists and certain statements in the Bible. For well over 3 decades, I have been exploring the subject of the inspiration of the Bible. I have come to believe strongly that its writing was divinely guided and that statements on science and history are accurate and trustworthy. There are many instances that illustrate this, but the account of Noah's Ark and the Genesis flood is an excellent example. Ever since I started making films, I have desired to produce a motion picture that defined and defended the inspiration of the Bible. Then a couple of years ago, I was asked to go on an expedition to Mount Ararat and produce a documentary film that explored the intriguing possibility that the very Ark of Noah might still be in existence on that famed mountain in eastern Turkey. First, there are several interesting questions that must be answered. What about this matter of the flood? Where did all the water come from? Well, first off, I think there is no arguing with the fact that there is not enough moisture in our atmosphere at the present time to produce a flood such as Genesis describes. But this doesn't destroy the Bible's credibility. The answer to the dilemma is very simple. The world before the flood was very different than the world as we know it today. Genesis 1:7 tells us, "And God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so." We learn in verse 20 that the birds were to fly in the expanse, which means the atmosphere. Therefore, we conclude that previous to the flood, the earth was surrounded by an enclosure of moisture, a vapor canopy. Whereas now we only have small amounts of moisture and scattered clouds. In the past, evidently, there was a heavy envelope of moisture entirely surrounding the earth. The waters which were held above the earth in this canopy were the waters above, as described in Genesis 1:7. The waters in the ocean below were the waters below, as described in the same verse. Now, this theory is an entirely reasonable assumption when we remember that there are 3 other planets in our solar system that have similar cloud covers at the present time: Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus. The weight of the canopy on Venus adds to the atmospheric pressure, making it more than 300 pounds per square inch. It increases the temperature at the surface of the planet to about 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the moisture in the Earth's canopy would help account for a great deal of water that is now on the Earth that science cannot account for. This is clearly seen on a topographical map of the ocean floor. The top 500 feet of water of the oceans of the Earth is of recent origin. Now, by recent, we mean in the last several thousand years. This is learned from what we find on the continental shelves. On all the continents of the world, the land slopes gradually down to the water's edge and then continues sloping to a depth of about 500 feet. Then it drops off into the deep oceanic trenches. Now, just a few thousand years ago, this was all dry land. This we know because of what we find there. For instance, we find freshwater rivers, freshwater shells, freshwater peat bogs, and the remnants of trees and the remnants of animals. Now, if we take only 1/2 of the water recently added to the oceans and place it up in the atmosphere in this canopy, we're able to make some numerical assumptions about conditions of the Earth before the flood. The temperature would have been the same all around the Earth, probably about 90 degrees. The canopy then would have produced a greenhouse effect. This would have made the entire Earth a tropical paradise with dense foliage all over the globe. And the fact that fossils of tropical growth have been found in abundance in the northern regions of our world tends to confirm our theory. Related to this greenhouse condition is the statement in Genesis 2:5 and 6 that it did not rain in the days before the flood, but that the earth was watered with a mist. This condition was the same as in the terrariums we have in our homes, where plants are placed in a glass enclosure. Then, even without watering, plants continue to grow. This particular jar was sealed over 2 years ago, and no moisture has ever been added. Another condition existing under the canopy would be a higher atmospheric pressure. This was probably right around 6 times what it is now on the Earth. But would life really have been possible under this higher pressure? Recent diving experiments have been carried on with pressures inside the diving bell of about 200 pounds per square inch. 4 men spent several weeks in these conditions without any ill effect. In fact, they found that if you cut your finger, it would usually heal in 1 day. Some experiments where surgery has been performed under increased room pressure have produced less damage to tissue and more rapid healing. Another effect of the canopy would be the shielding of the Earth's inhabitants from harmful cosmic and solar rays. Now, the chief effect of such radiation is aging. Undue exposure to the sun or to X-rays tends to age people more rapidly than if they were protected. Doctors and nurses who work with X-rays live on an average of 5 years less than other medical workers. This canopy shielding would also account then for the long lifespan of those who lived before the flood, some almost 1,000 years. Thus we find adequate scientific backing for this theory of the Earth's condition before the flood. And this theory would have accounted for all the water necessary to produce a flood of the depth that Genesis describes. But the physical aspects of the earth are not the only considerations. It was the evil thoughts and the actions of mankind that brought about the flood. This behavior was a result of certain conditions that were existing upon the earth. First, lifespans were longer. Second, population was extensive. Third, there are clues that knowledge before the flood was farther advanced than we might first guess. Fourth, immorality and violence were rampant. The fifth condition was that faith in God was almost non-existent. Thus the stage is set. The physical world had the tremendous amounts of water in storage, which were the means of judgment. It was the social and moral conditions that were the reason of judgment. And God was the initiator of judgment. To change the world as much as it seems changed from the pre-flood condition, it would take divine action. Now, how the flood started is not clear, but 2 distinct things did happen. Genesis 7:11 says, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened." Notice the 2 distinct actions which correspond to the 2 conditions of the newly created earth. There was the water below, which were the fountains of the great deep, that is the oceans, spilling over the continents. Then there was the water above, the windows of the heavens. This was the canopy which fell to the earth as rain. Just how the oceans were cast over the continents, we do not know. But we find good evidence that it did happen. This is the opinion of Dr. Clifford Burdick, who holds a PhD in geology.
There were several striking evidences we found on Mount Ararat which seemed to indicate that the water at one time was even over the top of the 17,000-foot peak. Now, I think one of the most striking evidences was the presence of pillow lavas, which we found everywhere on the mountain, from bottom to top. Now, pillow lava is lava that has been poured out into water, cold water, which has quenched it and is frozen quickly, and it forms concentric fracture patterns or circles similar in shape to that of a pillow. We don't find that in other basalt except where it has been ejected underwater. We find a great deal of this pillow lava all over Mount Ararat. Another evidence which we find on Mount Ararat for the flood of Noah is the presence of conglomerate rock. Conglomerate rock is a sedimentary rock that has been cemented together from discrete particles of rock which have been rounded by rolling in the streams of water. I've seen that at 13,000 feet on Mount Ararat. we find the large pieces of rock which are rounded, cemented to the small pieces together in one cemented mass, and that's what we call conglomerate rock. It is a sedimentary rock formed underwater. I think one of the most spectacular and perhaps diagnostic evidences of the flood waters having covered the mountain, was the discovery which we made on the west bank of the mountain. We found an immense salt deposit several hundred feet thick at an elevation of around 6,000 feet. And we went into the caves and pulled out samples of beautiful crystals like this. Now this was precipitated, of course, when the ocean was 6,000 feet above the present level. Now some people have asked, couldn't that have been precipitated from fresh water? Absolutely not, because fresh water wouldn't contain any salt. But this had to come from the ocean, indicating that the ocean was at one time above that level. And so I think the evidences are seen not only in Mount Ararat, but all over the world, that at one time the earth was covered by a great flood, as the Bible indicates.
However, it was not only the oceans that were involved in the flood. It was also the canopy which collapsed, providing the rain that fell for 40 days and 40 nights. But what caused the canopy to condense? Well, it's not known for sure, but the strongest possibility is volcanic action. Nothing seems to cool the Earth's atmosphere like an erupting volcano. When Krakatoa in the Dutch East Indies erupted in 1883, it spewed 3 cubic miles of smoke and dust into the atmosphere. The temperature all over the Earth dropped several degrees, and sunsets were red for many, many months following. Simultaneous eruptions in several places on the Earth would provide enough drop in temperature to collapse the entire canopy in the form of rain. It is interesting to note that a heavy layer of volcanic ash has been found beneath the polar ice cap. Thus, with the oceans washing over the continents and the rain falling for 40 days and nights, the judgment of God was carried out. Mankind was receiving the wages of sin. Now, what were the results of the flood? First of all, there was drowning. This was the purpose of the deluge, the destruction of all air-breathing life, especially man. This was the most catastrophic tragedy in the history of the world, and it was occasioned by man's sin and rebellion against God. But it was a means of judgment never to be repeated. For with the collapse of the canopy, there was no way to repeat the event. And by the same token, now with the removal of the canopy, a rainbow would be possible for the first time in history. And that sign God chose as his promise that never again would he judge the world by such a flood. Now, let me make it clear that we don't necessarily believe that the flood happened exactly this way. All we're trying to show is that the flood was scientifically possible, because so many think it was an absolute impossibility. This provides us with a reasonable alternative which is in harmony with scientific data. But the flood is only half the problem. We also have those questions about the reality of the ark. Did it ever exist? And was it really large enough to carry all those species of animals? I feel that these questions can also be answered with a great deal of factual material. There are 2 basic areas of concern. First, the actual size of the ark. And second, the intriguing possibility that at this very moment it may still be on Mount Ararat. For there is evidence that indicates that it has survived these thousands of years. And that's all the more remarkable when you realize just how big that ark really was. Now, the question of the ability of the ark to carry all the animals needed to perpetuate all the species is answered simply by reconstructing the cubic capacity of the vessel. We've asked an authority to come today and do just that. Dr. John Whitcomb is a professor of Old Testament and is an author of several books on the flood and the ark. Dr. Whitcomb, Describe for us how large the ark was and what it looked like.
Contrary to popular opinion, the ark was not a small boat with a little house on it. In fact, we have no record of any ship being larger than the ark until 1858 AD, when the Great Eastern was built in England. From the biblical description, the ark probably looked similar to this model. It was shaped like a box or coffin, as the original Hebrew word indicates. Assuming an 18-inch cubit, the ark would have been 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. This would be equivalent to a 4-story building a city block long, or about 1/2 the size of the ocean liner Queen Mary. The total area of its 3 floors or levels would be equivalent to 20 basketball courts. It had a total capacity of 1,400,000 cubic feet. This would be equal to the capacity of 522 modern railroad boxcars. But was it enough to hold all those animals? Think of the stupendous variety of air-breathing animals populating the globe today. From the smallest kinds to the very largest kinds. It has been computed that the average size of all air-breathing land animals in the world today is a sheep. Some animals are larger, many are smaller, but they average out the size of a sheep. If we took 2 sheep as representatives for each kind of animal today, we could put them all into less than 200 boxcars. That means the ark would have easily been large enough to carry all the air-breathing animals living in the world today, plus all those that once existed but are now extinct. It must be remembered that created kinds are not the same as varieties. Thus, there were probably only 2 cats and 2 dogs in the ark, not 2 each of all the modern varieties of cats and dogs. Present varieties have descended from them. Now, what about the ark's construction? And where were the door and window? The Bible states that the ark was made of gopher wood. Exactly what that was, we're not sure, for the word gopher is not the translation of the word, but the English form of the Hebrew word gopher. There was 1 door on the side, probably on the 3rd level, with ramps down to the 2 lower levels. The window was not a hole in the wall with glass, but was probably an air vent running the length of the roof as indicated by the Hebrew word which may be translated the light above. This is the only place that the word occurs in the Old Testament. As you can see, this would have made a very watertight vessel, for the water probably came about halfway up the side. Now, how stable would this design have been in the turbulent flood that was previously described? A study was made of this question by Dr. Henry Morris, an authority in hydrodynamics. He and I co-authored a book on the Genesis flood. Dr. Morris found that the length of the ark would have made it very stable end to end. Taking a cross-section, he evaluated the weight as opposed to the buoyancy and found that the ark could have rolled on its side up to 89 degrees and it would still right itself. So, the ark would have been able to carry all the animals and survive the turbulence of a global flood. We must not, of course, underestimate the protective hand of God as indicated in Genesis chapter 8, verse 1.
Thank you, Dr. Whitcomb. Now the question that remains is, could this giant wooden ship really survive several thousand years on that frozen peak? Let's look at the historical evidence. During the last 4,000 years, there have been frequent and authentic references to the Ark's existence. The earliest mention of the flood is in the Gilgamesh epic from Babylon. However, the details that are recorded in the book of Genesis are far more accurate. We also have mention of Armenian pilgrims going to the mountain and taking pieces of the Ark back with them. Then in 275 BC, Berosus, a Babylonian historian, recorded that the Ark was still on the mountain in his time. Josephus, the Jewish historian, states the same thing about 100 AD. Several of the early church writers also state their belief in the existence of the Ark in their time. Then during the Middle Ages, there were continuing mentions of the presence of the Ark still being on Mount Ararat. More than a dozen historical references have been found during this period of time. But it was not until modern times that the more important discoveries were made. In 1876, Sir James Bryce of Oxford University in Britain found very old wood high on Mount Ararat. And then in 1883, the Chicago Tribune and the New York World both reported the actual discovery of the Ark by Turkish government officials who were inspecting earthquake damage on the mountain. 4 years later, Prince Nuri, Archdeacon of the Nestorian Church, claimed to have scaled Mount Ararat and discovered the remains of the Ark. He failed in his effort to raise enough money to have the boat brought down from the mountain. Then in 1902 and 1904, an Armenian by the name of Georgi Hagopian climbed the mountain, discovered the Ark, and explored inside. Before his death, he guided this artist in this drawing of the Ark. Notice how it corresponds accurately to the biblical description. Then during World War I, the Ark was again sighted, this time by Russian soldiers under the command of Colonel Alexander Kur. When Tsar Nicholas heard the news, he sent scientists back to the mountain to study the discovery. They reported finding the ancient vessel, but all of their photos and drawings were lost because of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917. Then in 1953, George Green, an American geologist, photographed the Ark while flying over Mount Ararat in a helicopter. His photos were lost when he was killed in South America, but not before almost 200 people had seen them. One of these was Mr. Fred Drake. Though he did not believe the Bible at the time, seeing the photos were so convincing that he became a Christian on the strength of them. Recalling the photographs, Mr. Drake drew the position of the Ark on a narrow ledge, partially covered by snow and ice. Wood fragments that appear very old have been found on the mountain on 5 separate occasions since 1876. One of these discoveries occurred in 1955 when Fernand Navarra, a French industrialist and amateur explorer, brought back 3 large samples for scientific dating.
En 1955, je suis parti.
In 1955, we made another expedition to Mount Ararat, and in journeying around the mountain, we succeeded in reaching the place where we found what I believe to be the remains of the Ark. We descended into a crevasse in the glacier and arrived at the edge of a lake. By digging in the ice, we were able to extract a piece of wood about 5 feet long.
Voilà le bois. Un des fragments, parce que j'en ai...
This piece, and the one on the mantle, are all I have left after all the tests were made. You will notice that this fragment is not a simple plank. It has been hand-shaped. Notice the square corner.
Et sa couleur?
You will also notice the dark brown color, which scientists tell me has occurred because of being in the glacier.
Eh bien, j'ai été aidé par les savants, dont de ma ville, de Bordeaux, qui m'ont fait faire des analyses dans des instituts forestiers, par exemple de Madrid, dans des
I showed the wood to scientists in Bordeaux, and they had an analysis made in the University of Madrid. I also had tests made at the University of Paris, as well as 4 or 5 other certifications. We also had a carbon-14 test made at Columbia University, and they all agree that the wood is about 5,000 years old.
While we are impressed with the sincerity of all 5 discoveries, it's really questionable that any of the wood may be claimed as a part of the ark. Even if they were accurately dated, they might only be a part of a barn that floated in the flood and then settled on the mountain as the water receded. Earl Cummings is a New Mexico businessman and has been involved in the search for Noah's Ark for many, many years. Here is his evaluation of the discoveries of wood on Mount Ararat.
Well, we have never said, as far as our group or my own family who are involved in the research work, and those, of course, associated with it, we've never said that timbers found on the mountain are from Noah's Ark. We only say that timber has been found on the mountain that appears to be hardwood and hand-tooled, and that it's on a mountain that doesn't have a tree, hardwood tree at least, and that there's no such hardwood timber within 100 miles of the mountain, but we never say that any such piece of wood or timber is from the Ark of Noah. Not until, at least, we rediscover the Ark of Noah and find that the timber in the Ark is the same as those timbers which have been found. The fact is that over the years, especially the last 125 years, there have been some 21 sightings of the ship, according to the claim of those explorers or expeditions that have been there. Timbers have been found in Iran that have withstood all kinds of weather, hot and cold, wet and dry, for 1,000 years, standing right out in the open air. But of course, we believe that the 22-mile ice cap of Mount Ararat and the glacial fingers that come from it, which are 12 in number, we believe that the ship will be found in this area.
Wood fragments found in 1955 and 1969 did not yield consistent dating. So in the summer of 1974, a new expedition went to Mount Ararat to obtain wood samples and carefully preserve them for atomic dating. Our film crew was a part of that expedition when it reached the mountain in July. The twin peaks of the 2 volcanoes stand majestically on the plains of eastern Turkey. Greater Ararat rises 16,964 feet into the air, and Lesser Ararat 12,877 feet. There's a permanent ice cap on the taller mountain that is 22 square miles in area. In some places, the glacier is over 100 feet thick. Most of the time, Ararat's peak is covered by clouds due to its height and the coolness of the glacier. The climb up the mountain was made mostly on foot, with the pack animals carrying tents, food, and equipment. Higher and higher we climbed over loose and slippery rocks. In the rarefied air, every step is laborious, climbing still higher and higher, following our Kurdish guide. But were we on the right mountain? Some throughout history have had strong question about this particular peak. Here is the opinion of Dr. John Warwick Montgomery, leader of the 1974 expedition.
I am on the mountain called today Agri Dagh, the ancient Mount Ararat. We are located at 3,600 meters in altitude, about 11,000 feet. Russia is to my right, about 10 miles away, and Iran to my left. This is the mountain where the Bible says Noah landed when the floodwaters abated. Some people have questioned whether this mountain is indeed the mountain on which Noah's Ark landed. At the end of the 19th century, James Bryce, the diplomat and mountain climber, was told that he made a fool of himself to come up onto this very difficult mountain when he found wood himself that he associated with the Ark. But Bryce very well defended himself before the Royal Geographical Society, and one of the strongest arguments he used was that from time immemorial, the people on this mountain have considered it to be the mountain on which the Ark landed. These people, known as Kurds, have lived here for centuries, and up until very recently, they would not climb to the top of the mountain because they were convinced that the summit was protected by jinn, mountain spirits, and these mountain spirits were there because they were protecting the place where the Ark landed.
We proceeded up the mountain hoping to arrive at an altitude of about 14,000 feet, where a number of years ago Navarre found fragments of ancient hand-tooled wood. Soon we were onto the ice cap, crossing and recrossing the many fingers. Crossing a ridge at 14,500 feet, we could see the Ararat Glacier below us. Peering into the crevasse was extremely difficult and very dangerous. But this is exactly where the wood fragments had been found before. Finally, we arrived at the ice cave where Navarre made his discovery in '55. But to our deep disappointment, near freezing water kept us from descending any deeper. After traveling thousands and thousands of miles and waiting for our permits for many days, we were forced to abandon our attempts. Our permits had expired and other filming assignments had to be filled. Those who become involved in the search for the Ark have gotten used to many, many disappointments. However, our biggest frustration in making this film was the absence of any first-hand evidence, especially a living eyewitness. We earnestly desired for something that would carry real weight in arguing for the validity of the story. While the actual Ark has not been seen lately, there are two pieces of evidence that argue very effectively for the accuracy of recent sightings. First, in 1972, the Earth Resources satellite photographed Mount Ararat from an altitude of 570 miles. Photos from the satellite are stored in the Earth Resources Satellite Library in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Images are made electronically in the same way that television pictures are produced. Then photos are made from the signals transmitted from the satellite. Each photo covers an area of about 13,000 square miles. Even so, objects as small as 100 by 100 feet have been identified. Highways, for instance, show as a light line with no definable detail. Here on the satellite photo are the two peaks of Ararat, Greater and Lesser. The narrow dark area on Greater Ararat is a very deep chasm known as the Ahora Gorge. In this gorge, there is a rectangular formation that is long and narrow. Careful study shows this to be a ledge about 1,000 feet in length. On this ledge, there is a lighter colored formation about 600 feet in length. This might only be a part of the rock, or it could be the Ark of Noah. On the master film, it is very subtle. But when the signals are analyzed by computers, which see more than the human eye, this light object appears uniquely different from other substances on the mountain. Many times we have been asked, if the evidence points to the existence of the Ark on Mount Ararat, why doesn't someone just go over and settle it once for all? Well, there are many reasons. First, there is only a short period each year when the weather allows searching, and unless the ice cap is melted back, the Ark will remain hidden in the glacier. Secondly, there are political and religious reasons that make official government permission difficult, if not impossible, to obtain. Small expeditions like ours are allowed from time to time, But a full-scale attempt is not possible at this moment. And it would take a very large expedition with a lot of equipment to accomplish the task. Now, the second piece of evidence that verifies the story came about as a result of our fervent request for God's help. During the gathering of material for this film, we were made aware of an eyewitness who reportedly had seen the ark. Jacob Radke, a Russian of German descent, told us about actually seeing the ark on 2 separate occasions as a soldier during World War I. We spent many, many hours checking and rechecking his story before filming this testimony.
I was only 18 when they called me in to the army. And we had 3 months training. And after our training, we went deep Russia to Caucasus. And from there on, we had to walk. 2 days we walked, 1 day we had to rest. We walked for about 3 weeks. Then we got on that little train. And when we were on the train, it was no closed train, just a platform. See a flat train?
Tell me, did the train travel very slowly?
Yeah, very slow. Yeah.
How long did the trip take over the saddle between the 2 mountains?
It took us for a week up and a week down.
Did somebody call your attention to the ark as you were traveling on the train?
Yeah, somebody, the man drove an engine on that train. He pointed us up to watch the ark. We're going to pass that berg Ararat, and we could see the mountain, the ark, and everybody saw, well, it was open, see, just flat cars.
What did the ark look like?
Ark looked like a great big barn on dark brown, but it was sitting on a slope. One end was higher up, one end was farther down, see?
What was it shaped like?
Well, the point was staying up, was pointed, V-shaped. The other end was widened, see?
Was part of the ark sticking into the glacier?
Yeah.
How many people were on the train with you when you saw the ark?
About 500.
Did they all see the ark?
Yeah, they all saw the ark. Well, it was an open train, and everybody known. After that, we were stationed for almost a whole year, and everybody believed and talked about the ark, see? And the same thing when we turned it and went back over to Russia, home.
Then you saw the ark more than once?
Just twice. When we were in to church, and the time we went out.
It couldn't have been just a large rock that you saw.
No, sir. No.
Does this say anything to you about the truth of the Bible?
It shows that the flood was there, and the ark was built, and now we saw it, see?
You're absolutely certain that it was the ark that you saw?
Yes, sir, I'm sure. Yeah, I was. How can I refuse it if I saw it and believe it and I saw it? I'd rather die like refuse it. And that's why I'm telling you too.
There have been some who have questioned the reliability of Mr. Radke's account. But since filming him, we have found 3 separate verifications in the testimonies of Colonel Coeur, Georgie Hagopian, and James Bryce. We were further impressed with Mr. Radke's sincerity when he expressed to his son after the filming that now he could return to his home and die a happy man. His testimony of seeing the actual Ark of Noah would be used in a film to tell people about the reliability of the Bible. Now, we have not presented all of the available data, and it should be stressed that the evidence that we have presented, both for the flood and for the ark, it's really not absolute proof. But we feel that there is enough evidence to allow a positive conclusion. Mainly, we have attempted to remove the ability of anyone to effectively say it couldn't have happened. We have shown that it could, and we have added evidence to indicate that it probably did. But what does this all mean to us? First, it should increase our faith in the Bible, the Word of God. It is a book worthy of our absolute trust. Second, the historical account of Noah's Ark should impress us with the reality of judgment. A righteous God who could not excuse sin in Noah's day will not overlook sin in our day. Jesus said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man." Thus, Jesus verified the authenticity of Noah's account and related it to the time of his own return, when conditions will be the same as before the flood. The Apostle Peter also believed the story and showed that a judgment of the past assures a judgment of the future. He further warns us that there would be some who would willingly forget that God judged the ancient world, holding all that water in store by his word. Now God holds another judgment in store, this time by fire. And for that judgment, we must all prepare. Now, even though God had to punish man for his sin, he also provided a means of escape, that is the ark. But it was a salvation by faith. Those on the ark had to believe and enter. As we look ahead to judgment in the future, our salvation is not a wooden ship, but a living person. Jesus Christ died to pay the penalty for our sins and thus became our ark of safety himself. But we must enter into him in the same way that Noah entered into the ark. That is, by believing that Christ died for us and by inviting him into our lives. Harry, it is my prayer that all who have seen this film will receive Jesus Christ at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you, Jack. That's my prayer also. But I'm sure that there will be many today who are just like people of Noah's time. You know, in my imagination, I can see those whom Noah hired as workers to help him construct the ark. There must have been times when Noah warned them of the judgment to come. But his preaching was met with laughter and scorn. No one had ever heard of a flood, and it had never rained. And judgment? Why, if there was a God, he wouldn't bring down his wrath upon them. So they continued their work on the giant boat, and then would go off to eat and to drink, to take part in their sexual sins, and then beat and kill one another. All the time they pushed the thought of judgment out of their minds. Thus it went for 120 years. Noah faithfully warning, people always scoffing. And then the fateful day, when Noah, his family, and all the animals were safely on board, God shut the door. There was no more hope. Then the earth trembled, and the oceans began washing over their shores. And for the first time in history, it began to rain. Now those who had scoffed at Noah and ridiculed his warning sought the safety of higher ground. Gathering their families, they frantically ran from one hill to another until finally there was nowhere else to go. With a watery death only moments away, they could look out through the gathering storm and see the giant ark floating its occupants off to safety. What agony and remorse must have gripped their hearts as they said to themselves, "If only I had believed, If only I had obeyed, I now would be safe. And then the judgment waters swallowed them up, and they were lost forever. There will no doubt be many in that future judgment who will be in the same situation. They will have heard the call of Christ, but will have rejected it. As they stand before God, they will say in their heart, "Oh, if I had only believed, if I had only obeyed and received Christ, I would be safe today." May I urge you to receive Christ as your Savior, your ark of safety, right now. Do it before the door is shut and there's no more hope.
As the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be.